Back in 1939, when Nazi Germany attacked the country and began World War II, Germany's assault unleashed a new form of warfare, the Blitzkrieg or lightning war.
This is the story of how a brutal campaign shattered illusions and marked the true beginning of World War II. The Polish invasion wasn't just a military assault, it was a showcase of the Nazi war machine, blending terror, surprise, and overwhelming force.
Poland falls in 28 days as Nazi Blitzkrieg and Soviet betrayal ignite global war fears.
In mere weeks, Poland was crushed under the weight of Blitzkrieg tactics, with tanks and aircraft working in deadly unison. Behind closed doors, secret deals between enemies paved the path for conquest. As Poland fell, the world awoke too late to Hitler's ambitions. The stage was set. Alliances were broken.
More than 25,000 people are killed. A propaganda film presents the Nazi version of events, blaming the Poles for the inferno.
And Europe would never be the same. Let's dive in. The pact that shocked the world. In the final days of August 1939, the world was stunned by a development so unexpected that many refused to believe it at first. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, ideological enemies locked in mutual hatred, had signed a pact. On August 23rd, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was officially announced as a non-aggression treaty. But beneath the surface, it was far more sinister. This agreement was not just about avoiding conflict. It was about carving up Eastern Europe. At its core was a secret clause dividing Poland and the Baltic states between the two powers. It was a deal sealed not in diplomacy, but in ruthless ambition. Until then, the Soviet Union had been seen as a likely adversary to Hitler's expansion. Western powers had hoped Stalin might stand against Nazi aggression, but Stalin, ever pragmatic, saw a different opportunity. He would buy time to strengthen the Red Army and reclaim territories lost after World War I. Hitler, meanwhile, was preparing to invade Poland and needed to ensure the Soviets wouldn't interfere. The result was a cynical alliance between two totalitarian regimes that agreed, quietly and efficiently, to destroy a sovereign nation. The reaction in Europe was one of disbelief and fear. In Britain and France, the pact destroyed any lingering hope that Hitler might be restrained. Communist parties across Europe were caught off guard, watching their ideological idol, Stalin, embrace their fascist enemy. And in Poland, the alarm turned to dread. The memory of 18th-century partitions, when Russia and Prussia had divided their land, suddenly seemed to rise from the grave. History was repeating itself, and the consequences would be catastrophic. In the days following the pact, Hitler moved quickly. On August 22nd, even before it was signed, he told his generals that Poland was now his for the taking, confident that the Soviet Union would not oppose him, and believing the Western powers lacked the will to fight, he ordered preparations for an invasion. The secret protocol of the pact meant the Nazis could strike from the west, while the Soviets waited to seize their share from the east. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was not just a betrayal of Poland, it was a betrayal of the idea that international diplomacy could maintain peace. For Hitler, it meant a green light to wage war. For Stalin, it was a chance to expand Soviet influence with minimal risk. Together, these two dictators had decided the fate of millions without firing a single shot. The West, meanwhile, scrambled. Britain had pledged to support Poland in the event of a German attack, but the reality of enforcing that promise was unclear. France, still haunted by the trauma of the First World War, hesitated.
Germany and USSR invade Poland, shocking world. Blitzkrieg crushes resistance as World War II begins.
And so, while European leaders stalled, Hitler acted. What emerged from that pact was a new world order, one where law and borders meant nothing in the face of power. The countdown had begun. War was no longer a possibility, it was now a certainty. And the first victim would be Poland, abandoned by diplomacy and surrounded by wolves. The invasion begins. At dawn on September 1st, 1939, the world changed forever. German troops stormed across the Polish border, launching a brutal and methodically planned assault. This wasn't just a traditional military campaign, it was a new kind of war, engineered to overwhelm, confuse, and crush the enemy before they had a chance to react. The German strategy, known as Blitzkrieg or lightning war, combined speed, firepower, and fear to dismantle Poland in record time. The invasion began with a symbolic strike. The German battleship Schleswig-Holstein, supposedly on a peaceful visit to the Polish port of Gdansk, opened fire on the Polish garrison at Westerplatte. It marked the first shots of the Second World War.
Back in 1939, when Nazi Germany attacked the country and began World War II, Germany's assault unleashed a new form of warfare, the Blitzkrieg or lightning war.
At the same time, German tanks roared into Polish territory from three directions: north from East Prussia, west through Silesia, and south from Slovakia. Their goal was to encircle and destroy Polish forces, cutting off any chance of regrouping or resistance. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, played a devastating role. Before Polish planes could even take off, most were destroyed on the ground. In the skies, the German bombers, especially the infamous Stukas, unleashed chaos on military convoys, railway stations, and even cities filled with civilians. Their high-pitched sirens, designed to instill panic, made every dive an act of psychological warfare. Within hours, communications across Poland were in disarray, and military coordination was breaking down. Polish forces were brave but unprepared for the scale and speed of the assault. Their army still relied heavily on cavalry units and outdated equipment, while the Germans had over 3,000 tanks and thousands of modern aircraft. More critically, the Polish defensive strategy focused on holding the border, a fatal mistake against a mobile and mechanized enemy. German forces quickly bypassed strongholds, encircling units and cutting supply lines. By the end of the first week, German troops were nearing Warsaw, having covered more than 250 kilometers. The Polish government remained hopeful that France and Britain would launch a counteroffensive from the west. While both countries declared war on Germany on September 3rd, their actions were limited. There was no immediate military relief for Poland. The promised support never materialized in time. As the Germans tightened their grip, the real horror of Blitzkrieg unfolded. Entire towns were reduced to rubble. Civilians were bombed without warning. Roads were choked with refugees. The speed of the German advance left no room to breathe, no time to recover.
More than 25,000 people are killed. A propaganda film presents the Nazi version of events, blaming the Poles for the inferno.
Every attempt by Poland to regroup was met with another flanking maneuver, another aerial strike, another encirclement. Yet, amidst this chaos, the Polish resistance stood firm wherever it could. In places like Westerplatte, small garrisons held out against overwhelming odds. In Warsaw, soldiers and civilians alike prepared to defend their capital to the bitter end. But the odds were against them, and time was running out. Poland was fighting for its survival. But the invasion had only just begun, and the worst betrayal was yet to come. The Soviet betrayal. While Polish forces struggled to hold back the German tide from the west, an even darker turn was about to unfold in the east. On September 17th, 1939, just over 2 weeks after the German invasion, the Soviet Union crossed Poland's eastern border. With this move, Poland's fate was sealed. The country, already overwhelmed, was now being attacked from both directions. The Red Army swept in under the guise of protecting Ukrainians and Belarusians living in eastern Poland. But this was no act of protection. It was conquest, agreed upon weeks earlier in secret. The Soviet invasion was swift and largely unopposed. Polish forces had been pulled westward to confront the German advance, leaving the eastern frontier almost undefended. The Soviets encountered little resistance and rapidly occupied huge swaths of territory. Within days, the Red Army had taken control of eastern Poland, capturing towns, disarming Polish units, and seizing infrastructure. Depending on the source, between 230,000 and 450,000 Polish soldiers were taken prisoner. Many would never return home. The move stunned the international community. The Soviet Union, which had long portrayed itself as a defender against fascism, was now openly complicit in Hitler's war. The earlier pact with Germany had not just been a political formality, it was a blueprint for the destruction of a nation. Poland was being carved into two, just as it had been during the 18th century partitions. History was repeating itself, only this time with tanks and bombers. For the Polish government, Now in exile, the betrayal was both a military disaster and a psychological blow. Their hope of holding out long enough for Allied intervention had been shattered. With the Soviet entry, any possibility of organizing a defensive line or launching a counteroffensive vanished. On September 18th, the Polish leadership fled to Romania, unable to maintain control over a nation collapsing under two invading powers. In the territories seized by the Soviets, repression followed swiftly. The annexed regions were declared part of the Soviet Union, and the 13 million Poles who lived there were now declared Soviet citizens. Property was confiscated, institutions dismantled, and thousands were deported to labor camps. Among the most tragic chapters was the fate of Polish officers captured by the Soviets. Many were executed in secret, most infamously in the Katyn forest. Stalin's betrayal wasn't just military. It was a calculated erasure of Polish leadership and identity. Meanwhile, in the West, the German advance continued. While the world focused on Warsaw's resistance and the British and French declarations of war, Hitler had already succeeded in his first major gamble. With Poland divided and defeated in less than a month, Nazi Germany had proven the devastating effectiveness of Blitzkrieg. And with the Soviets now complicit, Hitler had gained not only territory, but time. For the Polish people, the betrayal by the Soviets was a wound that would never fully heal. Their country had been erased from the map, again, and the cost was only beginning to be understood. The fall of Warsaw. By mid-September 1939, the Polish capital stood alone against the unstoppable force of the German war machine. Warsaw, a city bracing itself for destruction, had become the heart of the Polish resistance. As German tanks tightened their grip from all sides and the Luftwaffe roared above, the city's defenders, soldiers, police, volunteers, and civilians prepared for a desperate stand. The battle for Warsaw wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. If the capital fell, so too would the last hope of coordinated Polish resistance. The Germans had already advanced over 250 kilometers in just over a week. Their Blitzkrieg strategy had devastated Polish lines, scattering troops and crippling communications. But Warsaw was different. Surrounded by defensive fortifications and filled with determined defenders, the city refused to surrender. Even as the Polish government fled east in the face of Soviet betrayal, the people of Warsaw chose to resist. The siege began on September 8th, and from the outset, it was brutal. German artillery shelled the outer districts relentlessly, while dive bombers screamed overhead, releasing waves of destruction. The terrifying Stukas, with their sirens wailing, created a psychological nightmare for the city's inhabitants. Buildings crumbled, fires spread unchecked, and the streets became battlegrounds. Civilians, many with no military training, joined the effort to hold the line, building barricades, carrying water, and rescuing the wounded. Despite the chaos, the Polish defense held firm for over 2 weeks. German commanders, expecting a swift capitulation, were stunned by the resilience of Warsaw's defenders. The Luftwaffe bombed the city continuously. Warsaw was hit 37 times in 1 week, but the capital refused to yield. Resistance was not just military. It was a matter of national pride. The people of Warsaw believed that as long as the capital stood, Poland had not truly fallen. Still, the situation inside the city was growing dire. Supplies were running low, communications were faltering, and morale was fraying. The hoped-for Allied relief never arrived. France and Britain had declared war, but no troops came. No planes soared over Warsaw to counter the Luftwaffe's reign of terror. The defenders were alone. On September 17th, as the Soviets advanced from the east, the final blow became inevitable. Two enemies now converged on a single battered nation. Warsaw's defenders fought valiantly until September 27th, when white flags began appearing in the windows. The city was exhausted, outnumbered, outgunned, and isolated. They had done all they could. On September 28th, Warsaw officially surrendered. Despite the surrender, the German High Command acknowledged the courage of Polish forces. Officers were allowed to keep their swords, a rare gesture of respect in a war defined by cruelty. But this was a bitter consolation. Poland had been crushed, its capital brought to its knees, and its fate sealed by the collusion of two empires. The fall of Warsaw marked more than the end of a campaign. It signaled that Hitler's war had truly begun, and that the world's failure to act decisively had already come at a devastating cost. Now, first, like always, be sure to hit the like button down below. It helps us out tremendously with the reach of this video. Thank you. A swift defeat and a shaken Europe. In just 28 days, Poland was erased from the map. The joint invasion by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union succeeded faster than even Hitler had imagined. Over 150,000 Poles, civilians and soldiers, were dead. The Wehrmacht suffered around 10,000 casualties, a number that underscored the imbalance in firepower, preparation, and strategy. For Poland, the campaign was a nightmare. For Europe, a terrifying wake-up call. Germany's victory wasn't just due to superior weapons, it was the result of revolutionary tactics. The Germans had perfected coordination between tanks, aircraft, and infantry. Their panzer divisions, guided by the Luftwaffe, sliced through Polish defenses. Airstrikes crippled supply lines and cities, making regrouping impossible. Poland, burdened by outdated strategies, mobilized too late. Cavalry and light infantry couldn't match German speed. Aircraft were destroyed early. Rather than fall back to natural defenses like the Vistula, Polish forces confronted the invasion at the border, playing into Hitler's hands. Soviet betrayal sealed their fate. The invasion's consequences extended far beyond Poland. Britain and France declared war on Germany on September 3rd, but their failure to act decisively revealed how unprepared they were. The phony war that followed exposed strategic weakness in the West. Behind the scenes, the numbers told a grim story. Germany had over 3,000 tanks and 4,000 aircraft. Poland had 600 armored vehicles and fewer than 900 mostly obsolete planes. France, though strong on paper, lacked coordination and modern doctrine. Britain, still rebuilding, offered little immediate support. The Polish campaign was more than an Axis victory. It previewed the future of modern war. Hitler saw a hesitant West. Stalin gained land with ease, and the rest of Europe braced for what was coming. The storm had broken, and there would be no turning back. Lessons from defeat and the rise of Blitzkrieg. The Polish campaign not only marked the first clash of World War II, but it also redefined how wars would be fought. What unfolded in September 1939 wasn't just a German military victory, but the unveiling of a new doctrine, Blitzkrieg. Fast, coordinated, and devastating, it shattered traditional concepts of warfare. Poland fought a war of trenches and horses. Germany brought one of tanks, aircraft, and relentless speed. At the core of Blitzkrieg was the tank-aircraft combination. Tanks didn't support infantry, they led the charge, breaking through lines and encircling forces. Mechanized infantry followed to secure gains, while the Luftwaffe bombed troops, airfields, and reinforcements. The goal wasn't destruction, it was system collapse. Ironically, elements of Blitzkrieg originated with French officer Charles de Gaulle, but his ideas were ignored in France. Germany, needing to offset its smaller army, adopted and refined them. With advanced communications and combined arms training, Blitzkrieg became a reality by 1939.
Germany unleashed Blitzkrieg, massive armoured assaults coordinated with air power and radio-enabled mechanized infantry to shatter Poland's defences in weeks and transform modern warfare forever.
Poland was unprepared. Though cavalry never charged tanks, they were outdated. The defense strategy focused on border protection, a mistake against mobile warfare. Units were isolated and overwhelmed. Luftwaffe dominance ensured no safe retreat. The Allies watched in shock. Britain and France, despite the warning, struggled to modernize. French armor was strong but uncoordinated. Radios were scarce, and doctrine lagged. Psychological warfare played its part. Stuka dive bombers, city bombings, and misinformation sowed panic. Civilians fled, clogging roads and disrupting defense. By campaign's end, Germany had demonstrated the terrifying potential of mechanized war. Blitzkrieg had worked. The age of slow wars was over, and Europe was unprepared for what came next. The aftermath and the road ahead. With Poland crushed and divided, Europe stood on the edge of a long and brutal conflict. Germany's swift campaign stunned military observers. For Hitler, it validated war as a tool for expansion and domination. For Stalin, the secret pact delivered vast eastern territories without a single shot fired at Germany. But for Poland, it was a catastrophe. The country once again erased from the map, caught between two totalitarian powers. In occupied Poland, the situation was grim. Nazi Germany controlled the western and central regions, including Warsaw, while the Soviet Union took the east. Repression began immediately. The Nazis targeted intelligentsia, clergy, and anyone seen as a threat. The Soviets deported or executed thousands, officers, teachers, and civil servants. For millions, war meant fear, surveillance, and violence. One of the darkest chapters followed in 1940, when the Soviets executed thousands of Polish officers and intellectuals in the Katyn massacre, an attempt to destroy Poland's leadership class and prevent future resistance. Meanwhile, France and Britain had declared war, but took little further action. The phony war settled in, with little fighting in the west, while Germany secured its position in the east. Allied leaders hesitated, buying time, but also losing it. In Germany, the victory became a propaganda triumph. Blitzkrieg was portrayed as unstoppable, its soldiers invincible. The myth of Nazi supremacy took root, even as the regime's brutality grew. Poland's government in exile vowed to keep fighting. Many Polish soldiers and pilots joined the Allied cause, playing key roles later in the war, particularly in the skies over Britain. But back home, Poland remained under a dark occupation. The fall of Poland wasn't the end. It was the opening chapter. Hitler had tested the world and found it unprepared. With his eastern flank secured, he now looked west. The storm was only beginning to spread. A world transformed by war. The conquest of Poland did more than redraw borders. It altered the course of history. What many hoped would remain a regional crisis became a global conflict. The illusion that peace could be maintained through diplomacy was shattered. Hitler's war had truly begun, and Europe was only starting to grasp the scale of what lay ahead. The Polish campaign exposed how unprepared the Allies were for the warfare Germany had perfected. Blitzkrieg wasn't just fast, it was devastating. In under a month, a major European nation was erased from the map. Civilians were bombed, infrastructure destroyed, and resistance crushed before it could rally. This was not a war of attrition, it was annihilation. Germany now held the center of Europe. Its eastern flank was secured through its pact with the Soviet Union, while Britain and France remained inactive. With Poland gone, Hitler gained time and momentum. The period that followed, the Blitzkrieg, or phony war, wasn't peace, but a pause before the next strike.
From the ashes of defeat, Poland's story remains a symbol of resistance and sacrifice.
Even in that pause, the world changed. Bomb shelters were dug, children evacuated, defenses readied. Hitler, emboldened, prepared to unleash the same fury on the Low Countries and France. For Stalin, Poland was just the beginning. Soon, the Soviets would move into the Baltic, attack Finland, and expand their reach. The pact with Germany was one of convenience, nothing more. For Poland, the war didn't end. It went underground. Resistance grew, and the exiled government worked with the Allies. Polish fighters sabotaged German efforts and kept the hope of liberation alive. Poland's fall was a warning. It revealed what unchecked tyranny and modern warfare could accomplish, and the cost of hesitation. The storm had arrived, and it was only beginning. The myth of Polish inferiority. One of the lasting narratives from the 1939 campaign is the myth of Polish military inferiority. Nazi propaganda painted Poland as outdated, a nation of cavalry charging tanks with sabers. This image, though powerful, was deeply misleading. It served to justify Germany's brutal invasion and reinforce the illusion of inevitable Nazi victory. But strip away the propaganda, and a different truth emerges, one marked by courage against overwhelming odds. Polish cavalry did exist, but they were not relics of the past. These were mobile infantry units used for fast movement and reconnaissance, often dismounting to fight. They carried anti-tank rifles, machine guns, and explosives. The infamous tale of cavalry charging tanks is a distortion, likely stemming from one clash with German infantry, later reinforced by armor, exaggerated by German war correspondents to mock Polish bravery. The Polish army knew it faced a superior foe, yet it fought with resolve. Small garrisons like Westerplatte resisted for days under bombardment. Warsaw became a symbol of defiance, holding out nearly 3 weeks despite relentless air raids. Even when cut off, Polish units regrouped and fought on. Poland's downfall wasn't due to weakness, but to geography, timing, and betrayal. Germany attacked from 3 sides with air superiority, while the Soviets struck from the east. Strategic missteps and late mobilization left defenses stretched thin. The myth of inferiority also served Allied inaction. Framing Poland's defeat as inevitable helped excuse their failure to intervene. But the truth is, Poland resisted with valor, resourcefulness, and sacrifice. Its defeat was not cowardice. It was a tragedy of overwhelming force and political abandonment. And even in loss, Poland laid the foundation for a resistance that endured. In those dark September days, Poland stood alone and fought bravely. This campaign wasn't just the fall of a nation, it was the rise of a terrifying new kind of war. Poland stood alone, encircled by enemies, abandoned by promises, yet still it fought with unmatched determination. The myths that followed could never erase the courage shown in those desperate days. What began in Poland would echo across continents, shaping a global war that would last 6 more years. As Blitzkrieg rolled on, the world would learn, often too late, the cost of underestimating tyranny. From the ashes of defeat, Poland's story remains a symbol of resistance and sacrifice. History never forgets, neither should we.